Welcome to Thinking Like a Lawyer with your hosts Ellie Mistal and Joe Patrice, talking about legal news and pop culture, all while thinking like a lawyer. Here on Legal Talk Network.
Hello, welcome to another edition of Thinking Like a Lawyer. I'm Joe Patrice from Above the Law. With me is Kathryn Rubino, my colleague here at Above the Law. How are you?
I'm well. How about yourself? Happy New Year.
Yeah, no.
As our first podcast of 2020.
That's true. It is our first 2020 cast. We capped off 2019, which we pretended was the end of the decade, even though technically...
Don't be that guy.
Yeah, I guess.
Don't be that year zero guy.
Yeah, but we capped it off with a quick recap of the year's top stories. We also have, if you read Above the Law, you also saw that we put up a attempt at the decade's top stories, even though our traffic numbers kind of didn't bear that out.
Well, I mean, separate and apart from what was the most popular, let me ask you, what was your favorite ATL story of the decade?
It's a fascinating question that I didn't really think of.
Sorry, I didn't mean to spring it on you. Just kind of, conversation being what it is.
Yeah, no, I mean, right. It's the problems with a non-scripted discussion. I feel as though,
It doesn't have to necessarily be something you wrote.
Oh, no, I mean, if it's good, then I would assume it wasn't. No, I don't really remember. I enjoyed I don't know. What do you think?
Well, I don't know about the decade, I suppose. It's been a long 10 years.
Yeah.
Especially, I think, in the legal industry, a lot of things have radically changed since 2010.
Yeah, that was when 2010, we were just coming to grips with recession. Because the recession's a little bit, the legal industry's, as we said on previous podcasts, a little bit of a lagging industry. Sure. So you're dealing with, we were just processing kind of the
right.
everything.
And layoffs were still happening. People were out of work. Thousands of lawyers were. Obviously, all those stories, I think, were very important. Ones that really exposed what was really going on in big law, so that people who were on the receiving end of pink slips didn't feel alone, that it was somehow their fault or a problem with them. But I also think, and probably recency bias, but I think that the way Me Too has implicated the legal profession has been pretty profound. I mean, think about who Judge Kaczynski was in terms of Above the Law in 2010 versus 2020. I think that is a radical difference. He was a respected and particularly on the pages of Above the Law, obviously predating our tenure at the blog, a very revered figure. And now whenever I write about him, the headline is disgraced former judge.
Right. Yeah, no, I mean, there have been several stories that we've done that have had some social significance, and those aren't always the ones that receive the most traffic.
Sure.
But we get our warm, fuzzy feeling when we go to events. I think Ellie went to an event fairly recently where he was listening to a panel discussing sexual harassment and Me Too discussion, Me Too issues, and the head of the panel, the moderator, that's the word for it. Sorry,
they actually have a title.
Yeah. The moderator made some point about, within the law school setting, we often don't see these problems, and the only outlet that allows us to know this stuff's going on is usually Above the Law, because they're the only ones who are a place that people feel comfortable telling their stories to. And we can't tell all the stories because obviously we are a small group. We aren't able to investigate independently a bunch of stuff. But if there are complaints out there, we can bring some attention to the discussions going on, and that's something that's valuable. Yeah, maybe not our best traffic, but probably the most important thing.
I mean, they don't get bad traffic,
right?
I think people are very interested to see how those issues are playing out in the legal sphere as well.
Yeah. So with all that said, before we get into our main topic of the day, I want to thank our sponsors and point out that today's episode is brought to you by your hamster, who's mad and thinking of moving out on you because you're still at the office slogging through an endless doc review project. Make better decisions, keep your pet, and work smarter with Logical, e-discovery software that gets you started in minutes. Stop spinning your wheels. Create your free account today at logical.com/ATL. That's logic with a K, CULL.com/ATL.
That's pretty good.
Yeah, and
That's pretty good. It's pretty
and you
good.
can vouch that in real time.
In real time,
it took me maybe 10 seconds to come up with something. Once I got it was sort of an improv. I said,
"Give me an animal."
Give me an animal, and hamster came up, and yeah. So I'm in a previous podcast that you weren't on. There was a discussion of, do I have some sort of pun book for animals? And I was like, no, I think it's better that it's organic, and we come up with this on the fly.
Well, you did it.
Yeah, no. So with I'll and now we reset the clock for me to come up with the next one. So what are we talking about today?
Well, I mean, it's the early days of 2020. I thought we could do a little bit of a retrospective and pour a little out for all the big law firms we lost this decade.
Nice.
I mean, obviously, law firm dissolutions were not created in the tens, right? There were obviously there were a few big ticket law firms that collapsed before 2010, right?
Do we know any?
They collapsed in 2012.
So that does not. I just wanted to.
That does not count. But the Kudare brothers, Thelen, Heller Ehrman. There's some big firms that collapsed in before we actually started 2010, but in a lot of ways, 2010 was characterized by big law firms collapsing. Most notably, do we know who we're talking about?
Yeah, no. So for those of you who are maybe new to the Above the Law universe, the dumbest repetitive joke that this publication has ever stuck to, and one of those jokes that I think we didn't come up with it was incredibly dumb, but it became something so dumb that when it was repeated enough, it came back around to being kind of funny.
Yeah, I mean, if there's a joke that you can,
grind into the ground enough.
Yeah.
So Dewey and LaBeouf went out of business, and the decision, ATL editorial, was to begin all stories regarding this collapse with the question, using the word Dewey as though it's a question. So you'd say, like, do we know how this firm is going to survive bankruptcy or whatever? And so, it's certainly not as good a pun as that hamster joke, that hamster gold that I just gave you, but it's something that we did. And at this point, I have a bit of warm reverence for it because we've done it for so long.
Yeah, and Dewey was once a quite prominent law firm. It was actually created by a merger of Dewey Ballantine and LaBeouf Lamb.
Well, right. Well, I would go even further back. The Dewey firm was actually the kind of the progeny of Root Clark, which is one of the more famous old school firms, and its name became Dewey because Thomas Dewey, who did not, in fact, defeat Truman, came on as a partner and demanded they name the firm after him, which caused some hurt feelings among those folks, which is why several of them fled to the progeny firms. And that's how some of those folks ended up being Cleary Gottlieb personnel, because a lot of the Cleary people had come out of Root Clark. It's a fascinating law firm history discussion, but we'll
table that for another.
Table that, yeah.
But yeah, so that was a once giant firm that went bankrupt in 2012, and I think that was a really big moment, I think, for the legal industry when all that kind of happened. You were actively practicing.
Sure was.
Then, and it was absolutely a topic of gossip and speculation for a lot of years.
Yeah, you're talking about one of the mainstays, a place that people I knew worked there, and at both sides of that merger. And when that merger happened, it didn't seem like a logical fit.
Sure.
It seemed like something was off.
Wasn't.
Yeah, it felt like something was off the whole time. And spoilers for those who haven't caught up, something was off the whole time. The case, I say case, I'm jumping ahead of myself. The fallout of this firm's demise resulted in criminal prosecutions, which of the folks running Dewey, who they were alleging had kind of cooked the books.
Yeah, the chair, Stephen Davis, executive director, Stephen DeCarmine, chief financial officer, Joel Sanders, and client relations manager, Zachary Warren, were all charged in connection with the collapse. Although only Sanders was convicted on felony charges, but he's appealing the conviction. Mm-hmm. So don't really have a resolution there. But
true.
But that was definitely a big one that happened. But it was not the only law firm that collapsed this decade.
Oh.
Yeah. Do you remember Howery?
Yeah. No, obviously I do. I just feel like I'm trying to make this banter make more sense if I don't know who these people are.
Sure. I mean, there were over 700 lawyers, 18 offices, worldwide, not just nationwide, and actually had recently, a couple years before, acquired a couple of boutiques, and it was in total expansion mode, but it missed its budget projections for 2009 and then set off a wave of departures.
So this is a good point to raise, and maybe I'll hold off on this point till a couple more of these get discussed. But I think I'm already seeing a theme that we will discuss down the road about the wisdom of expansion modes. But yeah.
Well, it's going to come up again.
That's why I think well, let's wait till we're done with this trend here.
Well, I mean, I think it's pretty much all of them.
Yeah,
I think it's
fair
pretty much
enough.
all of them. There was also Bingham McCutcheon.
Well, Bingham's slightly different because they. Well, Okay,
say what you're gonna say.
So, one thing that I'd say about the expansion, it will come up again, but a lesson to be learned is that growth and expansion is not necessarily a bad thing. In fact, I think it's fair to say that if you are not one of the elite firms right now, there's a good chance that you're going to be squeezed out if you don't find some way to create a synergistic merger with somebody else to move yourself revenue-wise into the big leagues. The problem with that is there's kind of and certainly this was true before the recession, there was some sort of panacea view of these mergers that if we just merge, everything's going to turn out fine. And there was not enough time and attention paid to how you deal with the redundancies that get created, how you settle with conflicts that start to come up, how you bring two different cultures who may have different views of how important it is to maintain this client versus that client get settled. And these sorts of divisions can fail to materialize in a successful firm. This isn't always true, obviously. There are several firms who have undergone successful mergers and are now, I mean,
obviously another big.
DLA Piper seems to be doing well.
Sure,
right? Like
sure.
This is there are places that do well with these mergers, but it takes smarts.
Well, and one of the things that I think was behind the Bingham McCutcheon collapse was they had obviously the merger between Bingham and McCutcheon, but also then in 2009 it merged with McKee Nelson, and I think that part of the strife was also the compensation models that were involved here, and I think we also played a role in the Dewey collapse as well, right? Is that certain big ticket rainmaking partners were promised these guaranteed numbers and guaranteed compensation, and whether and how the firm was able to pay them and who they were not going to pay in order to pay these guaranteed monies all caused a tremendous rift within the firm.
Mm-hmm.
And my favorite little factoid about Bingham is that 750 lawyers all left the same day.
Well, and that's the next trend that I was going to raise, which what makes Bingham somewhat of a different story as far as you're trying to identify themes of the last decade is mergers have issues, right? We just kind of outlined the issues that they might have. What the Bingham discussion introduced was the non-merger merger. It was a situation where Morgan Lewis looked at the cow and said, maybe I can get the milk for free. And instead of taking on Bingham, they just on a massive scale carried over laterally most of Bingham. And so these partners and associates moved over laterally, and that left the husk of Bingham and its liabilities and problems outside of anything that Morgan Lewis had to take on.
Yeah.
And that's something that I think it has not taken over as the preferred way of doing things, but that's a way in which I think a lot of firms are going to consider when they look at firms to raid in the future, is maybe instead of merging, I can just steal some folks. And I think we've seen, maybe not on the scale of what happened with Bingham, but we've seen since then.
I mean, that's bigger than a lot of firms.
Right. We've seen since then, though, firms that have gone into decline where multiple firms are pulling laterals out, but you can point to one that's pulling,
most
30, 35, 40% of the people out.
Yeah. Do you remember the tale of Dixtine Shapiro?
Obviously, but go on.
Well, they had some trouble following the 2008 recession, as lots of firms did, but they held on for a while. And the interesting thing about Dixtine is also a lobbying arm. They do more than just, or did more than just legal work. They also did lobbying. And in 2003, they hired former Speaker of the House, J. Dennis Hastert.
Something happened with that guy, didn't it?
Yeah, You want to talk a little bit about the political scandal?
Yeah.
I mean, he was indicted.
Yeah.
Is the short story on bribery charges.
Right. And that bribery is the statute of limitations level, statute of limitations issue of, covering up the bad stuff.
Yeah.
So the bribery, I'm intentionally kind of bumbling about this because it is uncomfortable, but while he was a wrestling coach, which was his qualifications to be the Speaker of the House, while he was a wrestling coach, there are some folks who said that he sexually molested them and he was paying those people, and what he got indicted on was bribery for paying these people not to bring their claims, which were barred, but
sure,
the bribery isn't.
Right.
Was the argument.
So he resigned. He was the head of their lobbying wing, and he resigned in 2015 when those charges became public. And then the firm was already kind of in straits and started searching for merger partners.
Mm-hmm.
And as you noted earlier, it becomes a bit of a theme. Blank Rome was able to get the milk for free, or in the form of more than 100 lawyers and staff.
Yeah, and so you've got these ordered kind of perfectly, actually, for a theme. We did not discuss the order, but yeah,
it's vaguely, roughly time based, but and then comes to some of the more recent. Those were all, if not directly related, time wise. A lot of those had their footings in the recession. The 2010. Plus kind of era caused a lot of problems, caused people to expand, and they maybe weren't ready for it. But then we have a couple more modern, more recent ones. Sedgwick. I believe it was actually in the beginning of 2018 that they announced that they were going to close their doors. But for pretty much most of 2017, a big story for me and Above the Law was sort of paying attention to all the ticks of partners that were leaving the firm and taking associates and cases and clients with them during that whole time. And actually, one of the interesting things about Sedgwick is I actually went to a panel discussion several months after they announced that they were closed from their former communications chief. And she talked about what happened when the firm collapsed. And I thought that was really interesting. And one of the things she pointed to was taking too much time to have a good message to the people who are still at the firm. When big rainmakers start to leave and lots of partners start sending in their departure memos, really one thing that a firm has to do is to know what their message to the people who are still at the firm are. And people want to feel secure, want to feel that they're going to have a job if they are one of the ones who stick around. They don't want to be like the sucker, holding the bag. And, internally at Sedgwick, it felt like there wasn't a very clear message. They took too long to come up with a good message. And that just led to more and more people feeling that their jobs weren't secure and trying to find their own exit route. So that's kind of what happened there.
Yeah, it's reminiscent of pre this decade demise, but when Brobeck went down, there was the court cases that spun out of the demise of that firm. There was a discussion about the early adopters, like the court cases even use the language like the early adopters and the late adopters, and what partners, the partners who left when they saw problems before anything else, got different payouts than the people who waited till the bitter end and just refused to see the problems.
Yeah. And I think that those lessons are being learned by the profession at large, and that was one of the problems for Sedgwick, is that no one wanted to be left without an escape route.
Yeah,
and so that's not a firm anymore.
Yeah, and that's the thing. Like, everybody is a little bit more skittish, which there's pros and cons to that. Obviously, if you're an early adopter, you shouldn't be stuck with the mistakes of others necessarily. On the other hand, it creates a situation where there's almost like a bank level panic, one of those 1800s bank panics, where if you start seeing rainmakers leave, the rest of the firm, even if the firm is still potentially solvent without them, the rest of the firm might start saying, I don't want to be caught as the late adopter, and a run happens on that firm, which is unfortunate.
And that's what kind of the message hearing from those who were internal to Sedgwick at the time. That was very much my takeaway, was that there was a run and no one wanted to be left. And the firm management wasn't quick enough to settle those fears and to prevent that run from happening. And really, that's what did that firm in, at least from their internal perspective.
Right.
And then in 2019, we saw the end of LeClaire Ryan.
Yes.
That was another firm that had done a ton of rapid expansion.
Mm-hmm.
And, some folks have complained that there was not a lot of support for some of this expansion. And then, at one point, they were 25 offices across 13 states in D.C. There were a lot of people and a lot of folks, and they tried really hard to keep the firm together for a long time. They started what they branded as Law Firm 2.0, and they had a massive deal with an alternative legal service provider, United Lex, in which it was a joint venture where the firm's professional staff were switched over to being ULX employees and leased back to the firm. But it wasn't enough really to save the firm. And it was actually in September of 2019 that it eventually collapsed. Dissolution was voted upon.
Yeah, I know.
Yeah.
I can't really say much about.
Sure.
I will clarify. I can't say much about this particular one because I was tangentially, as a consultant, somewhat involved in helping a few of the partners who left. And so I can't say a lot of what I heard about that while I was working on that.
Of course. Well, I covered this story extensively.
But you covered it, so what you said is not incorrect.
But it's, again, another one where you see there's a changing direction of the firm. There's not great communication amongst all of the offices and all the people. And it led to it was another one where it wasn't just like one day there's a story, they're gone. It was several months worth of stories of these number of 15 partners have left, 10, partners here, partners there, a slow and steady drip of partners. And, there's a lot of stories at Above the Law. We don't generally cover when the average partner laterals to another big law firm. Right. That is, it's unless it's truly remarkable for some reason, that's just not something that we kind of cover in the day-to-day.
I mean, it happens.
Occasionally.
It happens. Well, no, I'm saying that it happens with a great deal of frequency that partners move. And unless they're huge rainmakers, it's not necessarily of national interest.
Right.
So that's why we don't do it every day, where some publications have reporters who are able to do that.
And that's great. And I love that it's a great resource for Above the Law as well. But both with Sedgwick and LeClaire Ryan, those were kind of my stories. And what you noticed there was not one story that happened. You started looking and kind of paying attention and saying, wait a second.
Yeah.
If you add up all the partners that are gone, you're talking about 25.
Right.
You're talking about 50, and I think that when you start seeing it's kind of the aggregate in those instances, it wasn't where, 100 lawyers left in one day to one firm kind of thing. But it was kind of over time that you sort of saw it happening. And with both of those, they were a series of articles that happened over the course of some time before they were eventually announced.
And I mean, I'll say that's how I got involved to the extent I did as a consultant, was at the point where there were certain trends developing. That's when I started working with a group of partners and associates, like an internal practice group, who said that they felt that it was in the best interest to their clients to move. Mm-hmm. And so that's when I started working with them on a profile that would be a better fit. And as far as I can report, that worked out well. So.
Fantastic. But I think that's another one of those cases where the bigger trends and we talk a lot at Above the Law that oftentimes big law firms are run like fiefdoms, right? That they're kind of little groups of partners or practice areas that have their own kind of rules of the road and their own interests at heart, as opposed to the overall firm, particularly when you're talking about a place that's 25 offices, 50 offices, whatever, where, it's kind of hard to manage all of those different interests and have a singular culture or a singular set of goals, as opposed to, caring about my clients or my people that work for me, my associates or whatever. And I think that's what you see if you don't have a really good strategy and you aren't able to communicate that strategy to all of the stakeholders, however many partners you may have, that this is what's going to happen. That's one of those, you see a small trickle and that it's a floodgate that opens up.
Yeah. No, it's very true. And it's been an interesting
decade.
position. Yeah, and it's been an interesting position for me to have folks, because of what we do, reach out to me and ask for advice. And it's been a situation that's had me have to firewall myself off of certain things and not talk to you about them, but it's been good to help people. So I'll throw that out there. I just wanted to clarify why I don't have things to say about this story.
Well, that's fine.
Fair enough.
So those are the really big law firm dissolutions of the 2010s. I guess not quite a dissolution, but I know a story you worked on, not quite big law.
Yeah.
But Celino and Barnes.
Yes. Well, for everybody who appreciates great jingles knows Celino and Barnes, the New York firm that has the one of the best and catchiest jingles of all time, with a phone number to match.
800-888-8888.
Yes. With that firm, the partners are in a dispute, and it looks like that firm may not survive in its current form. I think they're still trying to hash out what partners are going to get what, and what happens when one of the named partners departs, whether or not it keeps going, who gets the phone number, those sorts of questions. The reporting on this is that the partners started having a lot of disputes over how the firm was being run. There was a fight over whether or not one of the daughters.
I was gonna say, wasn't it a lot more personal? Like,
I think it was a business issue at first, and I think it then manifested. One of the daughters of the named partner wanted to work there, and that was blocked by the other named partner because, like, gee, I mean, nepotism's not great, but I mean, come on. So that added fuel to it, and that's still ongoing as a fight. And we still see their smiling faces on billboards.
You do.
Acting like they still are friends, so who knows? So yeah, so that is the year in review, I guess.
Do you think
the decade in review.
Here's a kind of a perspective question.
Okay.
We'll have 2020 vision. Get it? Not as good as pun as...
Yeah, you may not want to get into this business. Yeah.
Fair. Do you think that we're going to see more law firm closures?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah?
Yeah, because I feel like right now, the trends that are between the haves and have-nots have not dissipated. And the AmLaw 150 to 50, basically, are in a place where mergers are kind of critical to their ability to keep going and keep competing with the big firms because of that gap. And I feel as though we're going to see more people make risky decisions. We're also going to see a lot of people make smart decisions and become the next crop of elite. But there will be struggles and there will be closures. And I think it's not unheard of to believe that a recession is looming.
I mean, that is like kind of the big question is when, probably not if, but when the next recession hits.
Yeah.
You know, and what industries are affected first will also probably impact which firms are impacted first.
Right. And as we discussed on a recent podcast, the immediate aftermath of a recession will be positive for law firms. They will be able to generate business off of it. But that's why it's a lagging indicator. That will eventually dry up as that works through the regular market, and then the law firms start feeling the hit.
Sure.
And that's what you should be, look forward to in this exciting time where we now have recessions every 10 years. So a thing that we didn't have for like half a century, but now we're back to the late 1800s model of every 10 years having a severe economic collapse.
Well,
so
it is the
fun.
20s that
can't
feel good, right? If you're worried about a coming recession, being back in the 20s can't feel great.
I mean, yeah. Well, although
maybe we'll get to 29 and then we'll consider ourselves lucky, but
yeah, I think we won't. So with all
on that optimistic note.
On that optimistic note,
get ready for the new year.
Woo! So with all that said, thank you to all of you for listening. You should be subscribed to the podcast. You should be giving it reviews, stars, write up something about it. It helps us move up that algorithm of your podcast providers so that when people search for law podcasts, we show up. Yay. You should be following us on Twitter. I'm at Joseph Patrice. She's at Kathryn1. You should be reading Above the Law, obviously. You should be giving some love to our sponsors from Logical. You should listen to The Jabot, which is Kathryn's individual podcast, which talks about diversity issues in law. You should be listening to the offerings of the Legal Talk Network generally. They have many different podcasts with a lot of different coverage areas, so check that out. And with all that said, I think we're done. I will, I'll be back next week, I guess. Maybe with you?
Probably.
We don't know. So that's that for this week. We'll talk to you later.
If you'd like more information about what you've heard today, please visit LegalTalkNetwork.com. You can also find us at AboveTheLaw.com, ATLRedline.com, iTunes, RSS, Twitter, and Facebook. The views expressed by the participants of this program are their own and do not represent the views of, nor are they endorsed by, Legal Talk Network, its officers, directors, employees, agents, representatives, shareholders, and subsidiaries. None of the content should be considered legal advice. As always, consult a lawyer.